No? So we're going to start now, and then we already have a lot of people online. And thank you again for everyone that is coming here. I know it's kind of like a Monday today after the holiday, so thank you for coming and for the people online. This is part of the CMS Policy Speaker Series. I know that we haven't had one in a while, so expect this year that we're going to have more of these webinars, and this is important because we're doing this in conjunction and jointly with the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center. And today, we're honored that we have here Argiro Cavada, that she's coming from NASA headquarters, and she is the program manager for the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center. We're going to be having a panel on the topic of the implementation of the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center. We're going to have Argiro Cavada, the program manager, talking first, and then we'll have our own Leslie Ott from the EMAO office, that she has been very involved with the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center presenting. And then at the end, we're going to have Erin McDuffie, that she is online, and she is at the U.S. EPA Climate Change Division, talking about the work of the EPA with the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center. And then we'll have time for a Q&A and discussion with the people here and the people online. Before moving to RG's presentation, I just wanted to take the time, because this is a CMS Policy Speaker Series. I may there are some people maybe here, some online, that they don't know about the Carbon Monitoring System Initiative. There is right now a call for proposals that is open for CMS, and it is open, I think, until March 12th. So I hope that people that are considering, they do submit a proposal. We have a lot of events and efforts for this year, so I wanted to take the attention. We're going to be participating of the ForestSat 2024 conference. It's going to be in New Zealand, September 9 to the 13th. Right now, there is the process of the abstracts open, and we, in the CMS applications, we have a session that is connecting science into decision making. So a lot of information relevant to stakeholders, but also that transition of research to decision making related to science and related to forests, in this case of ForestSat 2024. The abstracts are open until March 20, so that's next month. You have a lot of time. And then I wanted to mention we have been also very involved, CMS, in a multi-agency partnership that is called AOIP, the Applied Earth Observation Innovation Partnership. It started between U.S. Forest Service and NASA, and now it includes other federal government agencies. Last year, we had a very successful in-person workshop in Salt Lake City. There were many people from NASA headquarters, also from U.S. Forest Service program managers. So we're going to have a workshop this year that is going to be in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and it's going to be focused on the topic of co-production and fire. So for the people that are interested in fire applications, that's going to happen in April 23 to the 25 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And if you have any questions, you can just reach out to me. And now I have other announcements, but I'm going to leave that so we can go and move to the presentation on the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center. So without further ado, I leave you all with RG Cavada.
Perfect. Okay, thank you so much, Hideo. Always great to be here at Goddard, and also really excited to be partnering on behalf of the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center with the Carbon Monitoring System Program, CMS, in organizing some speaker series together this year. So today I'll be talking to you about the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center. Some of you may be familiar with it, others may not, so I'd love to give you an introduction, dive into some of the things we are currently doing to prototype the center, and also some of our stakeholder engagement, opportunities for linking with activities that CMS is doing, a bit on looking forward, and then I will hand it over to Leslie and then Erin that will dive more into some of the focus areas and activities we're doing to again, prototype the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center. Am I pointing here or here? Perfect, yeah, that makes sense. It doesn't appear to be on. Okay, perfect. It is on. So yes, that would, okay, perfect. So wanted to start with the motivation and a bit of the landscape within which the Greenhouse Gas Center is being developed. And so as many of you know, the U.S. has committed to pretty ambitious goals with respect to curbing greenhouse gas emissions. And in addition, there have been a number of activities, both through the National Academy of Sciences that produced a report highlighting the need for more integration of greenhouse gas information, both from observations, modeling, as well as other types of data to inform and help support progress toward meeting these goals. That report also called for a data clearinghouse that would help really enable some of that enhanced data integration, transparency, building trust, and then sharing and making the data more easy to access, but also to use. And then more recently, there have been efforts also to coalesce the federal government with recognition also that there is a need for more of a whole of society approach to help, again, combine activities and information from different parts of the federal as well as non-federal space to better inform progress toward reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And so in the end of 2023, around end of November 2023, the Interagency Working Group on Greenhouse Gases that has been led out of the Executive Office of the President produced a report on presenting a strategy, a national strategy on greenhouse gases. And so that report called for a monitoring and measurement information system on greenhouse gases. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because the Greenhouse Gas Center is part of that national strategy and informs its implementation. So if you read the strategy, you will see the Greenhouse Gas Center called out, in particular in multiple areas, as part of informing different phases of the national strategy. And so all along there is a recognition that there is a need to help track progress toward meeting emission targets, improve access, usability, and integration of information that is transparent and can also be trusted, therefore enhancing and sharing information on evaluation and standards for doing that, especially with respect to also new measurements that are coming online, both from public and non-public entities, and fostering collaboration, really coordinating across government and non-government. So the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center, you can see here the vision and mission outlined, and again, it's based really on what I shared in the previous slide. So again, extending accessible and integrated greenhouse gas data and modeling capabilities from U.S. government and non-public sources for scalable impact. There is also a strong link to international activities, and we'll be talking about some examples of where the center is already engaging and leveraging how the different agencies that are currently part of the center have been working both domestically but also on the international sphere. This is text heavy. The reason why I included this here is to mention that currently we have 4 agencies that are part of this prototype phase of the center. In addition to NASA, who is the lead operating agency, we have EPA, and again, we're pleased to have Erin McDuffie from EPA today with us to speak on behalf of EPA. We have NOAA as well as NIST as the 4 implementing agencies currently. We are actively working on developing processes and identifying ways to incorporate additional partner agencies from the federal space. So we've been talking with USDA, Forest Service, DOE, among others, and we are looking to also advancing our discussions with non-public entities. So the private sector, philanthropies, academia has a strong aspect here, and so the research component, and we're already doing different activities working with some of these agencies. You see some of the example of agency capabilities that are being leveraged, and I'm not going to read through this, but again, I think it's important, and you'll hear from Erin on how we're working with EPA to help share and also support some of the activities around GREEDed, anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, starting with methane. With NOAA, we have been working and leveraging some of their data from the Global Reference Network for monitoring greenhouse gases. And also NIST, we're really looking at NIST to support and lead some of the activities on standards and standardization around evaluation of new measurements, and also some of their work they've been doing on urban emissions, especially through their urban test beds, and some recent activity and collaboration between NOAA and NIST on developing approaches for grading CO2, as well as some air pollutants at the urban scale. So this is a slide that probably many of you that have listened to presentations from me or Leslie have seen in the past. And so this really highlights how we are looking to integrate some of, the leveraging the program of record, again, of NASA and partner agencies, taking the observations, combining it in advanced data simulations and model systems to help really integrate it and provide more updated and regularly delivered estimates of greenhouse gas emissions and fluxes in ways that can be, again, more responsive to users. And so we have been using our conversations with colleagues from EPA as well as the other partner agencies, in addition to what we have been hearing from stakeholder activities that we've launched in 2023 and currently, to help inform some of this work toward providing updates. And again, we're leveraging really mature capabilities that come out of programs like CMS and other activities that have been sponsored by NASA programs as well as partner agency programs, and focusing on delivering this more regularly again. So moving away from a research paradigm to a more sustained delivery system. We're leveraging VEDA to do that, so the visualization, exploration, and data analysis platform that, again, leverages a lot of investments from different programs that NASA has invested on to help provide this coordinated data system. And so as part of that, we're looking at a front user interface that we're currently working toward, and that one enables visualizations, access to the data sets, data analysis. There is a hub space for being able to collaborate and share code through Python notebooks. And we are also looking to move toward, again, making this end-user system more usable and accessible by different types of stakeholders. So we're really looking, moving forward, to be leveraging more and more input from different types of stakeholders and users to be informing improvements and future iterations of this system. On the right-hand side, you see the three focus areas we're using to leverage to prototype the Greenhouse Gas Center. And you also see some of these feedback loops that we're working to build through this system. So again, we're really interested in using feedback we are getting from user focus groups, from stakeholder and listening sessions, to inform future activities and to better refine existing products being shared through the portal. So this is the beta portal that was launched at the end of 2023. The URL is earth.gov/GHG Center. So if you haven't seen it, I invite you to go and look at the current capabilities, what's featured there. Again, the information is organized. You have a data catalog, data analysis, data insights that are really stories about how the current products on the portal can be leveraged to inform efforts toward meeting mitigation targets, toward better assessing and seeing how emissions are changing. And we also have the hub, as I mentioned earlier. We've recently built a Learn page as well, and so you can now access information on different trainings, short courses. We had one recently at the AMS, and there will be a newsletter that will soon be available through the portal where you can get more information on different events that the center is organizing. The three focus areas that we're currently using, again, we are also sharing the information on the beta portal and organizing it also as one of the ways we're organizing information is as part of these focus areas. Again, one is on gridded anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions, starting with methane and EPA's gridded methane data set. And so we're looking again at providing visualization capabilities, making that information and workflow more open, more accessible, so that others can be using it both in terms of a capacity building aspect. So for example, other countries that may want to follow such a process, they can access and do that. But also in terms of, seeing the research community and others as a user as well, where we can actually enable more improvements that can happen through intercomparisons between atmospheric observations and bottom-up efforts to develop these inventories. Again, we are working hand in hand with EPA on this, and I'll let Erin provide more input. Moving forward, we are looking to also addressing other gases, including gridded CO2, and looking at some of working with agencies like NOAA and NIST in evaluating some of these forthcoming gridding approaches on CO2. like one that is coming out of the NOAA NIST GRAPES initiative. Natural greenhouse gas sources and sinks, so this is really focusing on complementing the picture of what's happening on the human emission side. And so currently we have a suite of products, including model estimates, and Leslie will be talking more about this. And so we are looking moving forward to, again, enable more intercomparisons, and also one of the ideas we've been discussing actually last week, where we had a meeting with the broader interagency team, has been to looking at potentially forming these data collections, again, ways to inform how different data sets on estimating fluxes, for example, from land and the atmosphere or ocean, can be connecting to each other. And so we're looking to inform, again, users on how they can better be leveraging the information that is currently available on the portal. And then the third one is really looking at large emission events. We're currently looking at both spaceborne, for example, observations from the EMIT instrument on board the ISS, airborne data sets from AVERAGE-3, AVERAGE-NG, as well as we would like to also be looking and working with data that are coming out of new forthcoming entities and satellites, including from the private sector, to see how we can be better informing and helping track large emission events. Again, we're working with EPA here as one stakeholder, where they'd like to be able to use that information to better inform future inventories and inform improvements in these inventories, but there is a suite of other applications as well here. There is a data catalog, and so here currently you can see the list of data sets that are available through the portal. Again, this is a curated, ongoing catalog, and there are different, again, capabilities in terms of analyzing and visualizing these data sets. You can see the different agencies that these are coming from. There are several NASA ones, in addition to EPA's Grid Anthropogenic Methane Emissions Inventory, and several that are coming either from NOAA or from NASA and NOAA investments and collaboration. Again, moving forward, this is one of the ways that this information is presented, but we're looking at additional ways to making this more relevant to different stakeholder needs. I have a couple of slides here to highlight a bit more on what's going on Focus Area 3, given that I think our next speakers are going to dive more into the other two focus areas. And so I talked about new observations to track large emission events. So we're currently on the portal, feature EMIT plume imagery, and you can access, in addition to the data sets, you can access the code. There are calibration validation efforts that are ongoing in collaboration with AVERAGE-3. And as part of future activities, we are looking to integrating airborne activities that are truly interagency as part of the portal. There is also active stakeholder engagement, but the EMIT team has been focusing on even before the inception of the Greenhouse Gas Center, and that's continuing through the Greenhouse Gas Center investments as well. And so you see a couple of activities highlighted here on the slide. Again, this is one of the ways we're also looking at the types of information and open source delivery that we're hoping to have as part of the portal in terms of providing that information and making it reproducible and available. I did want to highlight, so ROSES 2024 is out, and as part of ROSES 2024, we have a call for proposals that is out, and so this one is looking at increasing collaboration and work with minority serving institutions, especially focusing on R2, and with collaboration with R1 entities, but with R2 entities primarily focusing as the PI for this solicitation. And this is looking at expanding their involvement in both operating EM27 instruments that help validate data, space-based observations. And we're looking at working with them also in terms of the data analysis and delivery of the information. So this work is actually run out of Goddard here. So Leslie, Bob Bauer, and others will be working with the entities that will be selected to help, again, support this activity. So this is currently out. You see some of the information pertaining to the research opportunity, and the close date is May 20th. I have a couple of slides to briefly talk to you about what we're doing with our stakeholders and stakeholder engagement. So again, these are representative examples. These are not extensive. And so we have enhanced support in the center to inform this stakeholder engagement. We have a stakeholder engagement lead, Shanna Combley. We are working with our centers and equivalent or people, points of contact that Shanna is working with to support that. We're looking at opportunities to be leveraging what CMS and other programs have been doing, and in addition, the other agencies that are involved in the center, so NOAA, EPA, NIST, ways we can be leveraging their work with stakeholders and learning from what they're learning from their users. And so you see that there are examples of stakeholders we have ongoing discussions with, in addition to targeted engagement. And again, this spans from the public as well as private sphere. In terms of the government, it's not just federal, but also state and city level, and we're really looking at ways to garner feedback and really help make this information that is coming through the center as relevant as possible at the state and local level. We're also engaging with convening organizations or boundary organizations. We have been looking at opportunities for working with USGCRP, for example, the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group, USGEO, on the international front, CEOs, the UN Environment IMEO effort. And so you see different examples highlighted here. I did want to share our draft stakeholder engagement timeline, and so that includes particular meetings. It highlights the user focus groups we've established, and we're starting meetings of those user focus groups coming up at the end of this month and beginning of next month. We are looking again at working with organizations like the U.S. Climate Alliance to convene a state-specific meeting where we want to introduce the center and then start hearing from different states what may be specific things that they require, both with respect to these focus areas, but also looking ahead with respect to expanding and addressing additional topical areas or specific things that they may require with respect to the products. Internationally, you see a lot of work going on with activities like the WMO. The Greenhouse Gas Center is supporting implementation of the IGES project within the WMO, in addition to having a lot of people embedded into the current activities of the Global Greenhouse Gas Watch implementation effort and implementation plan. I mentioned CEOs, the Committee on Earth Observation Satellites, and working with other space agencies internationally. And you also see different activities. Of course, the NASA CMS science team meeting is highlighted, and we're looking to engaging more again with CMS moving forward. A couple of things I want to highlight before I move on from this slide is that we are looking to have a couple of releases, what we call releases or additional iterations, expansion of what we currently have on the beta portal of the Greenhouse Gas Center. And so we're looking at a second beta portal release in mid-April. And then we're looking at one additional one by the end of September. And so we're hoping that by then we can have an added, expanded showcase of the capabilities around this prototype activities and areas that the center is focusing on. With Shanna's leadership here, we are looking to have a stakeholder workshop, kind of like what we've called full demonstration capability stakeholder workshop sometime in the fall, where we'd like to have people not just working directly with the center in terms of the implementation, the implementing partners, but also users and stakeholders highlighting how they are using some of the capabilities of the center, and again, feedback on the way forward. This is just to call out the user focus groups I mentioned earlier, and you can see the first meetings of those groups being set up. These again include a number of folks from different levels of government. There are non-government people, including the commercial data providers or on the commercial analysis side, in addition to institutions, academic institutions and others that are included in each one of these focus areas. And you have the barcode where people can access and sign up. So there is an active, open signing up for those user focus groups. So feel free to share it, and if you have interest, to join those. Looking ahead, I wanted to end the presentation with just highlighting some of the things we're looking to do moving forward. So again, we're looking for ways to engage with additional agencies, both from the federal government. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentations. We are talking with entities like Forest Service, USDA at large, to see how the center and they can be working together to inform, again, and expand the focus and support some of their needs. So looking at refining and also adding new capabilities. We are also looking at developing a process and criteria that can help us enhance and integrate new data, new capabilities in the center. And so again, that can include ways in presenting the information, ways that, again, data sets or user guides or activities that can be supportive of what different types of stakeholders need. We have been discussing of a data inclusion strategy that can, again, would take into account, for example, non-public data sets and how they're being shared and included on the site. So ways for evaluating and standards for actually enabling that, working with and sharing such information. And here we're looking at leveraging and working with programs like the Commercial Satellite Data Buy program of NASA or of other agencies, and understanding from those processes, seeing how we can kind of take that and then inform a more sustained activity like what the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center is aiming to do. Developing decision support tools. Again, the goal is really to do that in the end, so to support and inform decision insights. I talked about the National Greenhouse Gas Strategy and supporting implementation of that. And lastly, but not least importantly, internationally. So we understand that there is definitely a domestic focus, but that does not preclude international. We know that this is happening within the international sphere, and so we are actively working with and are looking at ways for expanding our support, but also linking the activities of the center with international efforts. I think that's all I had, so thank you very much. Maybe I took too long. Okay. Maybe we'll take questions in the end, or how do you want to do it?
We'll go to the
I think so.
presentations, and then
Yes,
we can take questions at the end. And now we have Leslie going, and then at the end we're going to have Erin from EPA.
Okay. All right. All right, thanks. And thanks to RG for the great introduction. So I'm going to get started and just call out a little bit of the organization. So as RG mentioned, we have these three focus areas. I'm going to be talking primarily about what we call Focus Area 2, or Natural Sources and Sinks. I just want to call out that that's co-led between NASA and NOAA, representing the contributions of both agencies and the expertise in different parts of the observing system and modeling capabilities. So I think this is probably a review for most people in this audience and on the call, but just to make the case for why we are including natural sources and sinks alongside the focus on anthropogenic emissions that a lot of people will think of when they think of greenhouse gases and policy. Most people in this audience probably know that if we didn't have a natural assist, we would already be expecting carbon dioxide concentrations of around 570 parts per million accumulating in the atmosphere, leading to really dangerous amounts of warming well beyond what we are currently experiencing. The reason that this is not happening, and that we know this is not happening, is thanks to the great observational record that we have from our colleagues at NOAA and universities that extends back a number of decades, showing us both the seasonality of actual concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and the difference, right? And scientists have been able to attribute this difference between what we expect from fossil fuel emissions and what we actually see in the atmosphere to the really critical role of natural sinks in the ocean and vegetation on land across the world. So this is great. This is the thing that underpins the climate system and is keeping us from a much warmer planet with many more extremes and disasters. The challenge is that we don't know how long this natural assist, this natural discount on carbon can continue. So being able to set reliable trajectories for limiting warming depend critically on understanding the fate of land and ocean carbon sinks. Similarly, when we talk about methane, here you're looking at the methane growth rate, again, monitored by NOAA for a number of decades. You can see a bit more variability there, which is reflecting the complex interplay of both human and natural sources of methane. I'll call out the methane budgets, which you see in these pie charts. Wetlands, probably which is the largest and best known natural source of methane, it's about 30% of emissions. On a global scale, it's smaller but still important. On the U.S. scale, about 10%. So again, like for carbon dioxide, understanding the full budget and the limits that we impose on greenhouse gases also rely on us understanding this natural contribution, which is somewhat outside of our control. And I will call out that the sink of methane is also something that we don't control. That's driven by the concentrations of other pollutants, other types of gases that are changing, right? So that oxidizing capacity, how long methane stays in the atmosphere, is something that we also have to understand in order to understand how quickly our emissions reductions are going to impact atmospheric concentrations. And as important as these natural sources and sinks are, we also know that they're changing and that they're vulnerable to climate change. So these are just a couple examples. Last year was the warmest year on record by a mile. It was incredibly warm, incredibly large number of disasters, which is a trend we've been seeing in recent years. And so some of those kinds of things, like increases in the fire frequency, length of fire seasons, and severity of fires, which reduces the capacity of vegetation to absorb carbon. Changes in the frequency and severity of droughts, which are associated with temperature rises and can affect the productivity of ecosystems and the health of coastal wetlands, and which are being impacted by sea level rise, and in some cases turning some of those valuable ecosystems from a net carbon sink into a source. And so when we talk about the federal strategy for greenhouse gases, it's important to note there's two parts of that strategy. The first is reducing human emissions that we can control, and the second is making sure that we do our best to maximize and preserve the natural sinks of carbon that are helping us limit even worse climate change, right? And so this is really the focus area that's designed at providing good quality information on that second part. In a more concrete way, I'll also call out that information on natural sources and sinks complements the kind of work that the EPA has to do in providing an inventory. This is an example from the EPA inventory on greenhouse gas emissions. And just calling out here that this also includes emission absorptions from LULUCF, the land use change in forestry sector. So it's important to understand that contribution, which right now offsets about 14% of human emissions of greenhouse gases, right? So being able to provide good quality information on the kinds of processes that can influence that sector are critically important and something that the U.S. government is responsible for reporting on. So hopefully I've convinced you it's important to focus on natural sources and sinks. I think that's something CMS already gets. But now I'm going to end by telling you, what are we doing about this? What is the greenhouse gas center role in providing these products? So let's start first on something, and this picks up on a thread RG mentioned and that came out a lot in the federal strategy. The Greenhouse Gas Center isn't necessarily responsible for doing research and innovating all of the approaches to characterizing natural sources and sinks. But what it's working really, really hard to do is improve the delivery, the quality, and the resolution, and access to some of those data sets through the data portal that RG highlighted, right? Everybody on this call, I think, probably knows that a lot of us operate in research mode, which means we do our best to deliver a product when we can, but it's not necessarily timely, it's not necessarily consistent how frequently we can update that. And for stakeholders and people to make decisions based on that, we need to do a lot better, and we know we do. So one of the first things we're tackling is routine delivery of land atmosphere flux estimates from a small ensemble of land models, many of those with heritage through the CMS program. Lagging real time by a few months. This is really exciting for me. This is the first time in my career that I can point to and say, we actually have estimates of land atmosphere CO2 flux, of wetland methane emissions for just a couple months ago, right? We've never had that before. We've always been working with data that's a few years old. So that's something that we're already have in the pipeline. You'll start to see that appear on the data portal in coming months. Also working to transition all of those methods so that they are open to the public, available on the cloud or in open source repositories so people can see exactly where those model-based estimates come from. we're working along, as we do all of these things, to push those model-based approaches to higher resolution so we can better support some of those stakeholder needs on the regional and state scales. And also working really closely with EPA to understand the definitions of natural sources and sinks. Again, this is trickier than you would think of, just understanding in what model or in what accounting method something is considered natural versus managed, how the difference between the top-down perspective from the atmosphere complements the bottom-up. There's a lot of work being done just understanding what is represented in what way in different modeling products. So that's the first step, is providing better data from those bottom-up types of models. The second is using that to track and monitor changes in greenhouse gas concentrations, be able to give some initial attribution of whether we think those are coming from natural sources or in some cases human activities. So this is involving regular simulation of greenhouse gas concentration data. This is a little snapshot of an animation from our model in the GMAO, and be able to, again, deliver that on a sort of quasi-operational cadence to complement the land model information. So here we're looking, again, at detecting changes in emissions, being able to spot something, the impact of extremes or changes in temperature earlier than we have been in the past. This also enables a lot of other tools, right? So global models are not the only game in town. Regional models often need boundary conditions. So this is an important step in building an ecosystem of modeling tools that supports a variety of users while using those models to track and evaluate the land models, because we know no model is perfect, right? So being able to do that benchmarking and evaluation regularly, which is complemented by this monitoring of greenhouse gas changes. And as Archie mentioned, we're really happy to have these kinds of systems contributing to WMO's recently announced Global Greenhouse Gas Watch. And then the final step in this little diagram is really bringing these things together. So we talk a lot about reconciliation of top-down and bottom-up estimates, but really once we've done this in a systematic way and evaluated the models together, being able to bring this together so that we can give a consensus estimate throughout the federal government. This is something we can't do right now, right? Of say what the U.S. government's best state of the science estimate is of natural sources and sinks, because we have multiple different ones. So bringing these together, coming up with the best estimate, and then propagating that back so that we can inform understanding and hopefully refine and improve the land models that we've started from is a really critical piece to close this loop. And of course, this is a lot of work. We can prototype this and make important steps over the coming year, but this is also something that lays out a framework that a number of us will be working on for many years, right? And if this looks like a lot of work, it is, and it requires a lot of people. And so another thread that Archie hit on that I'm just going to close on in my last slide is that through the GHG Center, there's a lot of effort, not just in making the best of the science that we have, but in trying to build up the workforce to do the next generation of work and ensure that we have enough people to do all of these important but incredibly complex and technical tasks. So Archie mentioned the IPMSI call, which is focused more on the instrumentation side. We're also really grateful that our colleagues at CSU are hosting the first GHG Center Summer School. This is focusing on the atmospheric inverse, the top-down perspective, as we would call it. This is just the first of this iteration, so we're really happy to see how this is going, and that we have, I think, over 70 students apply for 20 spots, so there's going to have to be some tough choices made, but we're really happy to see the interest, and I think that just speaks to the need that students have in terms of getting involved with important, actionable areas of research and the needs that we all have as researchers in building the next generation of the workforce. So I think that's it, and with that, I'll hand it off to Aaron and take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. And now we have Erin McDuffie joining online from EPA. So we see you, Erin.
Perfect. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess I'll just say next slide, but I need to advance. Okay, great. Thank you. As Adil mentioned, my name is Erin McDuffie. I am a physical scientist at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, working in the Climate Change Division in the Office of Atmospheric Protection. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today and speak about EPA's contributions thus far to the GHG Center. I'm excited to be here. I'll try to be quick so that we can have some time for discussion. But today I wanted to hit on some threads that RG and Leslie already mentioned, but take a slightly different approach where I'm going to talk about each of the 3 use cases kind of from the EPA perspective, and then dig into some of the details on use case 1. But to start with that, I'll give some background on the greenhouse gas inventory, then go into EPA's perspectives, and then a short demo of use case 1 data set at the very end. So next slide, please. Okay, so thus far, EPA's interactions with the US GHG Center have mainly been through the group that develops the US Greenhouse Gas Inventory, US Greenhouse Gas Inventory of Emissions and Sinks. So our contributions to the center thus far have largely been through the lens of how can we use this information to support the inventory. So what is the inventory? Kind of a high level 101, if you've heard me give similar presentations, this is nothing new to you, but very quickly, EPA develops this annual report of national anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions and sinks every year. The emissions are provided by gas and economic sector over time from 1990 every year, all the way through the current year -2. So this year's 2024 inventory will go through the emissions year 2022. EPA has been developing or leading the development of this inventory for I think over 30 years now. And EPA doesn't do this alone. We work with many partner agencies, institutions, and organizations who all support various aspects of the inventory. This inventory is largely developed using a set of tiered methods from the IPCC, which largely rely on country or activity-specific emission factors, modeling activity data, et cetera. The reason we developed this report is because it's part of our commitments under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So EPA submits this report every year for the US on April 15th. The detail I wanted to note here is that every inventory cycle, so every year, the entire time series of emissions is recalculated. So we're not just tacking on an extra year of emissions. The team is actually going through and recalculating all of the emissions from 1990 through the most recent year to reflect any improvements in data that were made in the previous cycle or potentially changes in methodology, but we are going through this full update process every single year. Next slide, please. Okay, so with that as background, I want to note that the greenhouse gas inventory is not the only GHG relevant activity that goes on at EPA. There's also the greenhouse gas reporting program. We have multiple rulemakings that are now focused on methane emissions from various sources. There's enforcement of those rules. We have an entire research office, some of which are focused on greenhouse gas emissions. So the inventory, again, is just the lens that so far we've been looking through as we're contributing to the US Greenhouse Gas Center. But here I'm showing a screenshot that I think RG showed in her slide, just highlighting the 3 initial use cases for the beta release of the center. So on the left, you have the gridded anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions. I'll talk about this more in detail in the following slides, but this is the one use case where EPA has directly provided data to the portal to date. We have, however, as Leslie mentioned, been involved in conversations in the other use cases as well. So just to provide some high-level perspectives from the EPA side on these use cases, on the middle one, natural greenhouse gas sources and sinks, I just really want to reiterate what Leslie mentioned in her presentation, and that even the definition of this use case is tricky. It's complicated because in the US, the vast majority of lands can actually be considered managed lands, and therefore the emissions and sinks on those lands are anthropogenic and would be included in the greenhouse gas inventory. However, not all. So we we do support efforts to help define the emissions from both what would be considered natural and anthropogenic in the IPCC sense, as well as identifying or improving spatial and temporal information about natural sources to complement our anthropogenic emissions. We're always interested in products like better land cover classification products, particularly that are backward facing, that we can use to develop historical time series of land cover classification, those types of things. So we are interested in being involved with this use case moving forward. And then use case 3, which is focused on large emission events. There are a few flavors here of activity going on. And I think the first is just the straight detection or identification of large emission events. That's important in its own right. And that type of data can have relevance to many EPA programs, even some of the new regulations, such as the super emitter program in the new NSPS EG rule for oil and gas sources. However, in addition to identification from an inventories perspective, we're also interested in the quantification of these emission events. If they happen to be events that are, for instance, like single well blowout events that have happened, we've actually been able to work with researchers to quantify the total emissions from those single events, and we have incorporated those emissions into the greenhouse gas inventory. So Aliso Canyon is probably one of the more famous examples there. But outside of those kind of single large events, we're also interested in being able to better quantify facility level emissions, so just kind of routine emissions coming from facilities, but at an individual facility level, and interested in the research that's needed to better understand the types of observations or the type of sampling approach that would be needed to estimate annual emissions from just kind of these snapshot observations at the facility level. So those are kind of high level perspectives from the EPA side. So now on the next slide, please, I'll go into a little bit more detail about the gridded product. So we developed this product called the EPA Gridded Methane Emissions Inventory. This data set is now focused on the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center portal under use case 1, and I'll give a demo on the final slide of that data set. But just a little bit of background, what this is if you haven't heard of this before, this is a gridded methane emissions product that provides it's a temporal and geographic representation of the U.S. greenhouse gas inventory. And so the current data product, this is version 2. This was developed with major support from Brom Massacres, who's at SRON, who also led the development of the first gridded U.S. methane inventory. This is now version 2 that I'm talking about today. But version 2 has gridded emissions from the year 2012 through 2020. We produced 10 by 10 kilometer maps, and some of the sources have both annual and monthly temporal emissions. We also provide data for over 25 individual emission sources. So it's not just total inventory emissions we're providing, it's emissions by source to help with some of the source attribution in the top-down comparisons. So why are we doing this? Why do we need a geographic representation of the inventory? Well, I think, as you all know, methane emission sources are fairly uncertain because their sources are fugitive or biogenic in nature, and emission estimates from observations can actually help us reduce some of those uncertainties. But direct comparisons with observations are very difficult to do, primarily because there's this mismatch in scale between the kind of snapshot aspect of observations, which are made just for a particular location at a particular time, compared to the national inventory, which are national annual totals. And so the gridded data kind of provides this intermediary step that can actually help us more directly compare the observations with the inventory. And we do this largely through an inverse analysis. But if you go to the next slide, yeah, sorry, I had animation here. What we are really interested in from an EPA perspective is providing the research community this gridded data on a more regular basis, but then ultimately working with the research community to close this loop. So we want to be able to work with researchers to help them evaluate their inversion results so that we can actually get information back out that we can use to help inform improvements to the national inventory, or at least provide improved evaluation of the national inventory. So our goal here with providing the gridding is to provide researchers with a tool that is needed to do these types of inversions, but then ultimately we want to close the loop and actually work with researchers to feed back into the inventory process. So the next slide was my last, I believe, and this was a demo of the data on the portal. This was about 5 minutes long, so maybe in the interest of time, I'll actually skip this because we only have about 6 minutes left today. So if you'd like more information, I have links here and you can always reach out to me. But please check out the portal, and there you can find visualizations of all of the emissions data from this gridded product. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Okay, so we're gonna go to Q&A. We can stay a few more minutes because we started a few minutes late. So we have a couple of questions in the chat, but I was gonna go to see if there is any questions here, or we're also gonna, if anyone wants to unmute and do the question directly or comment to any of the panelists, please raise your hand. Question here. Let me.
I'm just curious how the information from the focus groups is going to be distributed, or will it be made available in general, or just to specific groups, or?
Sure. Thank you for that question. So we will be looking to synthesize the information from the focus groups and then use it to inform. So I'll start by saying that we are looking to be bringing the scientists and subject matter experts that are working on these focus areas to these focus groups. So we want to have representatives from each focus area attending the user focus groups, listening in, and really have this interaction. And so what we would like to do moving forward is synthesize the information and then help address it in a prioritized type of way and tiered way based on a number of things and criteria. Now, in terms of making the information itself available, this is something that I don't know we've discussed, but I don't see any issue with doing. So we could use the portal itself and make that available as well.
Thank you. There was another question here, I think. Here.
Yes, hi. So this is a question for Erin. I really appreciate that the EPA has come up with this gridded methane emissions. Are there plans to do this for CO2?
Yeah, thanks. I just answered the same question in the chat. At this point, there are not plans to grid the CO2 emissions from the inventory, but if the research community thinks that that would be a helpful product, that is useful feedback for us to hear. But at this point, there are not plans to do that. We're going to stay focused on methane for now.
Okay. Thank you, Erin. Any other questions here? Or if there is any person online that wants to unmute and make the question? Yes, I see Chris O'Dell.
Hi. So this is a question, maybe a two-part question for Erin and as well as Leslie. So I may have missed it, but I didn't get where the EPA gets its sink information for CO2. And I was wondering, also on the plot that Leslie showed of, like she showed a map of NEE, if that came from a GHG center product, and if that's going to be something they're sort of spinning up to have an official sink, source sink product that would be like potentially folded into the EPA estimates.
Well, yeah, Erin, do you want to take the first part of that one? And
Yeah.
And hi, Chris.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, thanks, Chris. Let's see. So for the greenhouse gas inventory, I would direct you to the LULUCF chapter of the inventory report, because that's going to detail the calculations for that sector, which largely included the net sink of emissions in the time series that Leslie showed. So apologies, I don't work on that part of the inventory. So I would rather point you to the report than give false information. So I'll turn it over to Leslie.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Erin. And yeah, I think also it's incredibly complex. So like there's a lot in the report that even if we had time, we couldn't summarize. So I think it's a great reference. And also one of the reasons we need dialogue, right? Because there's a lot of complexity in how we provide information from satellites and models, and then what EPA needs in order to be able to make an inventory, which is incredibly challenging. Erin also called out this challenge of needing a long time record, right, to be able to actually characterize emissions and sources and sinks, right? So that's a challenge that is particularly tough for satellites to meet. So to Chris's point about net ecosystem exchange, so these are examples. This is actually an example of our old school CASA product that we've recently updated, are working to evaluate and get onto the GHG Center portal, and I've also pushed that to finer spatial scales. So this is one of the kinds of land models that we're working to turn out more regularly, and be able to vet with atmospheric observations and put that through all of the paces so people can understand the strengths and weaknesses of different products. And so I think in terms of like the use in the inventory, I think this is still one of those things that's a very indirect kind of metric that helps provide scientific understanding and information, but not something that is, you know, feeding directly into the inventory. I think right now we're still working to make sure on the science side that we're providing the best and most consistent information and figuring out how to get that into the hands of policymakers. I will note, you know, one thing we've discussed that we're trying to scope out is what are the needs. So Erin and EPA have created this great product that, you know, researchers can use to be able to compare against satellite data with something that's consistent with what EPA thinks is the best spatially disaggregated method. You know, but we want to have something that's consistent for natural emissions of wetlands, right? So that complements the whole package that we can provide from EPA, from the NASA NOAA perspective, you know, to bring that together. And so that's one example that we're moving towards, particularly, you know, probably prioritizing the methane side first, just because of the emphasis on EPA and the maturity of the gridded inventory. But I think stay tuned, because I think that's one important point, is figuring out how we can make this information more useful to EPA and many other partners. So thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Leslie. We're going to finish with two questions that we had in the chat, and then we'll finish with that. Shayna is online, and she has been providing information on how to engage with the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center. If you want, after the talk, to engage with the Greenhouse Gas Center. But this is from Molly. I think this is for Leslie. What is the role of machine learning in data assimilation within the GMAO system?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Molly. So I would say right now the data assimilation is very strong in our systems. We assimilate a number of data sets that inform the climate state, the atmospheric state, as well as greenhouse gas concentrations. There's also a lot of work going on. I mentioned that there's an ensemble of land models. That also includes land models using different approaches to assimilating different types of vegetation data. In our ensemble, we actually have George Hurt's global ed model, which of course has a pretty strong tie to biomass estimates and LIDAR, which is great. So there's always need and room for advancing those, but I would say on the data assimilation side, it's quite sound. On AI machine learning, I think that's an emerging area where we don't have a lot of emphasis in the current suite of modeling tools, but particularly as we're looking to get those data sets, which if they're global by nature are a little bit coarse in terms of scale, the ability to merge those data sets with other, higher resolution approaches to get down to something that's more actionable at those kinds of very local decision-making scales is something we're going to be looking at. So I think right now, I would say there's not a whole lot of focus on AI/ML, but we're really looking to that as we move beyond the prototyping phase is a way to make those data even more actionable to a growing number of stakeholders. Did that answer it, Molly? Yeah.
I hope it did.
Yeah. And thanks, Molly.
Yeah. Just still. Okay, one last question, and this one is from Aaron Mayer to Erin regarding the industry. Beyond researchers, how is EPA incorporating feedback and findings from the industry with changing methane rules and oil and gas industry taking action using commercial monitoring products? How does EPA work with the industry to incorporate this data?
Yeah, that's a great question and multifaceted, but I'll try to give the simple answer in that from an inventory perspective, we're largely working with industry provided data by using data reported to EPA's greenhouse gas reporting program. So all sources that emit more than 25,000 metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year are required to report to the GHGRP. And so we have that data from the reporting program for facilities, for individual facilities. And so in the inventory, we actually use that data to inform some of our annual inventory estimates. So that's the most direct way that we're engaging with the inventory, or sorry, with industry.
Thank you, Erin. I want to give the final word to RG, just in case if you have any final reflection, remarks about the work of the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center before we finish.
Okay, thank you, Dil. So I want to thank everybody in the room. It's really exciting to have people in person and the many of you online that, spend the last hour listening, but also posing great questions. I want to thank Leslie as well as Erin very much for their continuing leadership and collaboration, in addition to the rest of the team that is really across 3 NASA centers. We have 3 other federal agency partners, many people that are engaging across the federal and non-federal space. I want to recognize our colleague Shana online, Shana Combly, our stakeholder engagement lead. So first of all, recognizing the entire team of people. And then mentioning that, again, this is the beginning for the Greenhouse Gas Center. We're really looking for collaborating with the CMS extended community. We want to leverage the activities that have been going on, the research maturing, and really, as Leslie pointed out, helping enable the delivery of that information in a more regular, sustained way to different groups of stakeholders. And so we'll be looking for feedback as well as for opportunities for collaboration. And yeah, so just excited and looking forward to continuing to work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again to RG, to Leslie, to Erin online, and everyone. And stay tuned. We're going to continue this webinar series jointly between CMS and the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center. And as RG mentioned, there are a lot of events coming up, and we have the NASA CMS Science Team meeting that I think is going to be here in Washington, D.C. in September, and we'll have the U.S. Greenhouse Gas Center present here. So thank you, everyone, again, and for the people here, we have coffee, and you're more than free to take coffee and stay here if you want until 1:30 and talk. And thank you, everyone online.
Thanks, Adil.
Thank you. Feel free to take all the coffee that you want, because if not, we're going to...
I don't think you want to eat. I feel like you don't want to take the coffee home.
No.